Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, well, we're pretending it is Wednesday, October 9th, 2019. It is Yom Kippur. What are you doing? Listening to the radio. You should be, okay. Well, not all of you will be atoning for sins today, but I will atone for the sin of pretending it is October 9th, 2019 when I recorded this. But if you don't tell, I won't tell. And, well, I guess that doesn't really help us, does it? Just thinking, theologically about the omnipotence of the power we're dealing with here. Okay, never mind. I think God probably knows what day it is, even now as we record this podcast for you. But I didn't want to leave you hanging. Things are, of course, crazy, plenty to catch up on, and I felt bad. I felt like it was a sin not to have a new show today, and I didn't need another one to atone to, although technically if I do it now, if I do it in the morning, well, I'm not doing it in the morning of October 9th, or whatever the Hebrew date is. I guess that's a sin all by itself that I can't even remember what the Hebrew date is, but I guess if I do this now, I will have to atone for it tomorrow, and if I didn't do the show, alright, well, technicalities that I can't figure out, things that are beyond my pay grade, I'll have to speak directly with the deity on this one, I guess, and see if we can't figure this thing out. Okay. Here on Earth, other things are happening. I have stories to share with you. Greg Dworkin, because I'm not on the air today, won't be able to join us. Neither will Joan McCarter. But I know that if he were here, he would want us. Sounds like he's died, doesn't it? He would want us to have shared I wonder if he'll share this on Thursday. Well, if he does, he does. No big deal. I noticed, we'll say yesterday, wink, wink, that Greg had tweeted this note out with this attached to this tweet, or a picture of the tweet from, is it a tweet or is it Facebook? I can't tell. David Nather letting everyone know that Trump's impeachment poll warnings, I guess, are all going off. Now, all the alarms are going off. Greg noting it took Nixon 5 months, I guess, under an impeachment inquiry, to get to 58% in favor of impeachment. We are there after 2 weeks. That, according to the screen grab he has included here from David Nether, Trump's impeachment poll warnings, public support for impeachment rising, and it's charted Trump against Nixon against Clinton. No polling data available for Andrew Johnson, apparently. And where are we? We're looking at Nixon rising to 58%. I guess this is old information because the Trump trend line only has 44%. Around the launching of the impeachment inquiry, whereas it was 38% for Nixon and 29% for Clinton at the time. Nixon eventually did make it up to 58% 5 months after the launch of the impeachment inquiry. I'm not sure why there's no line that far out for Clinton, but there isn't. 44% currently for Trump, and I guess if we've gone to 58 according to some of the polls, that happens, about 4.5 months faster than it did for Nixon. So Greg goes on to say that number is impeach, not remove, in the Washington Post. Remove, the question with should we remove him from office, is closer to 50%, which is about where it was, or it was inching up towards that number the other day. Greg also notes, by the way, the other interesting aspect is even at the end, Nixon was only 58%, and he's enclosed that in air quotes there. Scary, airy quotes. Scary quotes for Halloween. It's October, of course, so scare quotes. Sure, why not? It's thematic, right? So only 58%, even at the end. Don't ever expect this to be unanimous, folks. That's not how it works. Oh, and I have one of those, too.
That is not how this works!
And that is a lot screamier than the way Greg does it. Okay, this Washington Post poll is only one poll, of course, he notes, but it is a wow poll. 58% impeach, 49% remove. That's significant movement. It means that at least some of this is penetrating, and we are moving to 50% remove territory. Other polls note that too, and majority support of the process. And then finally, America has a lot of work to do, and we always do, really, honestly. Think about how much work we have to do rehabilitating Ellen DeGeneres, just alone. But focusing on this for just a moment, America has a lot of work to do, but the point of the Washington Post Schar poll is to tell us that folks think it's a legitimate inquiry. Arguments against that particular point fall flat. And this is the end. Okay, so thanks, Greg, for bringing us up to date, well, or what would have been up to date yesterday had we talked about it then when you tweeted it. Certainly would still be news today when I read it to you, even though it was yesterday. By tomorrow, that is to say 2 days from now, where I am, I'm on the other side of the international date line. I don't know whether it's going to be old news. By that time, it's going to be like 75% remove. It's going to skyrocket. I'm going to predict that right now. It's no sin to predict it and be wrong. So, I think I'm okay with that one. All right. There's more out there that needs sharing, some of which is, let's see, I feel like we need to continue on with what we were dealing with yesterday, the backgrounders on the weirdo Ukrainians that keep showing up in the middle of everything. We have this bit of news, as long as we also got into who is defying subpoenas and who's not. And the Miami Herald lets us know that the Uclownians, Parnas and Fruman, will not be complying with an impeachment inquiry. This I got from the Miami Herald. Alex Doherty is the writer on this one. Two South Florida businessmen, you know who they are, who peddled supposedly explosive information from Ukraine about corruption involving Biden and Clinton and everybody else who happens to be a Democrat. They will not comply with a request for documents and depositions from the three House committees overseeing the impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump. Parnas and Fruman will not respond to a Monday deadline. This, of course, being Wednesday. Wink. It's old news, but it was even old news when it was Tuesday, which it is. But at any rate, I thought I'd bring you up to date on the fact that they are denying the request. And remember, by the way, we've got another story developing on this. The committee is still, all the committees are still operating under the excruciating rules, and it's not even a rule, but the procedure that leads them to first, I guess, technically speaking, invite people to testify. I would request that you come for a deposition and that you produce these documents. And they say, I'm not going to do that. At which point they issue a subpoena instead. Like we asked you nicely. Now we'll ask you, tough style. Here's a subpoena. Many, if not all, of the witnesses will likely end up, I guess, witnesses that would be friendly to Trump, at least initially, will likely defy those subpoenas as well. And then the next step is either, as it has been to this point, going to court to try to see if you can get a federal judge to enforce a congressional subpoena, or to issue I guess basically, what did we decide the mechanism what they were trying to use? To issue a court order to comply with the congressional subpoena. The failure to do so, the failure of which would then put you in contempt of a court order insisting on compliance with the subpoena, for which you could be held in contempt of court and imprisoned. Well, not imprisoned, but jailed, pending your compliance. I guess on a civil contempt charge, Huh. Well, at any rate, I'm not that up to speed on actual contempt of court these days. But yeah, I guess you would be held in contempt, I guess civil contempt of court, a coercive penalty that essentially no date certain anyway, for the end of your confinement. You simply are held until you comply. It's a lot of pressure to have to deal with. And also, something a lot like the inherent contempt power of Congress. It's just people are used to hearing contempt of court and seeing it occasionally enforced. And but that is when it's civil contempt like that, it's something that the judge just says right here, right now. The court bailiff takes you into custody and brings you to the jail. You just led away. There's no further proceedings to find out whether you're guilty, because it's not a criminal contempt case. There's no trial on it per se. The court simply decides that inherently it's got an inherent power to hold you in contempt, which is exactly what the Congress would be saying. It's been a long time since anyone did it. Anyway, so that's the story. They are being represented, you'll recall, Parnas and Fruman, by John Dowd, the guy who used to represent Trump but left at some point, and the guy who sent the letter to the House saying, no, we will not be complying with the voluntary request that was printed out in Comic Sans. No response planned, says Dowd. Democrats working on the burgeoning impeachment inquiry said Parnas and Fruman's decision to ignore a request issued last Monday will lead to subpoenas, which would compel them to testify and provide documents or face criminal charges. We'll see. The other opportunity, of course, is for the Congress to vote on a contempt of Congress charge, a statutory contempt charge, forward that, as you know, to the Department of Justice, whereupon presumably, well, I don't know whether they would do this for Parnas and Fruman or not, but they could decline to prosecute the charges. Or they could prosecute them. I don't know if they care about those two guys or not. Throw them under the bus too. If they do prosecute it and it's satisfactory to the Congress, I guess that's that. If not, they might try with inherent contempt. But again, I don't think so. Probably instead go to court and ask the court to enforce the subpoenas. That is the process underway, I believe, at the moment in a different, but, a distinct but similar case. I happened to see Darren Samuelson tweeting. Darren Samuelson, the Politico reporter, was on hand in federal district court in D.C., where the House Judiciary Committee and the Department of Justice squared off over the lawsuit from the Judiciary Committee. They say here in the tweet, the Democrats' lawsuit, but it is, of course, on behalf of the House Judiciary Committee, suing to get the Mueller grand jury materials handed over to them. And as you may recall, this could hinge at some level on whether or not the court buys the notion that the House Judiciary Committee is the final arbiter of whether or not there is an impeachment inquiry going on, and whether that understanding, that declaration, makes any difference when it comes to overcoming the usual prohibition against disclosing grand jury information. So Samuelson was there covering the proceedings, noting that there were no Judiciary Committee members in the courtroom, but they sent Democratic staff, including the House Counsel Douglas Letter there. Let's see, a couple other names. Do we want to name everybody? Why not? Give everybody a moment in the spotlight. Perry Applebaum, Norm Eisen, and Barry Burke there for the Judiciary Committee staff. First a couple of links to stories that are backgrounders about the case. The Chief Judge, Beryl Howell, sitting on the case, Obama appointee who oversaw the Mueller grand jury and presiding over this case. Arguing for the House is General Counsel Douglas Letter. Lead DOJ attorney was Elizabeth Shapiro, Deputy Director of the Civil Division. And let's see. Just reading through the tweets here, let's see what's important about what happens. The DOJ attorney table also includes James Burnham, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, previously worked in the White House counsel's office under Don McGahn, so a great guy, I'm sure. Judge Howell tells the House of Representatives attorney he should not assume that she's read the unredacted Mueller report. I'm just a member of the public, she says. A member of the public who supervised the grand jury, Darren reminds us, of course. And Judge Howell just trying to establish early on what the House Judiciary Committee wants to still see and hasn't yet seen from the Mueller report. Letter, the House counsel explains they want to see the grand jury materials related to what witnesses saw or heard with respect to both candidate Donald Trump and President Trump and WikiLeaks. Judge Howell asks how much the House is speculating about what it thinks is in the Mueller redactions and that it does relate to Trump's mindset. I think it's very informed speculation, Letter says, pointing to material around the redactions. Letter notes that there are unredacted materials about what Paul Manafort may have relayed to the president about the relationship that the campaign had with WikiLeaks. Judge Howell asks how much the DOJ has turned over with respect to FBI 302 interviews. Letter says the House has gotten very limited material, including nothing involving Don McGahn and his top aide, Annie Donaldson. Letter continues, the very heart of what we need to look into as the Judiciary Committee and the Intel Committee are engaged in our impeachment investigation, which is going full bore. We're getting almost nothing. Judge Howell says she wants specifics from the committee by the end of the day about why it needs all the grand jury materials, noting that her opinion is going to be a speed bump, as she says, on the way to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and she wants to establish a factual record. Samuelson goes on to note that at that time they're now in a discussion about whether congressional impeachment proceedings are a judicial proceeding that would open the door to grand jury materials. The House maintains that because the Senate will hold a trial, that's a judicial proceeding. The Department of Justice disagrees. Howell asks where the Judiciary Committee wants her to draw the line on what is, and I guess what isn't, an impeachment proceeding. She notes that the Republican ranking member on the committee, Doug Collins, filed an amicus brief arguing that the House must hold an authorization vote. They have in the past held votes specifically authorizing impeachment inquiries, but as I recall, somewhere along the line we may have read that there has since been a change to the standing rules of the House such that that would no longer be necessary, not to mention the House's prerogative as the sole arbiter of its own proceedings and rules. It will tell you when it's in an impeachment inquiry, and if they're in court arguing that they are, then they are. That's in a lighter moment. Letter says that he has multiple arguments and asks Judge Howell, how long have you got? She replies he can go as long as he needs, and Letter jokes, terrific, I like district court arguments. There are limitations, time limitations, more strict once you get to appeals. Letter says the House can say when it's doing an impeachment. Sure, why not? The House is fully engaged. In fact, we're spending one heck of a lot of time on an impeachment investigation, as I'm sure you're aware, both the Judiciary Committee and several other committees in the House. Judge Howell posits that this could be resolved if the House would just vote to authorize an impeachment inquiry. You'd probably rule for all of us. We'd be done, Letter says. But, he notes, there's no House rule or anything in the Constitution or statute saying this is required. Judge Howell presses Letter to explain if Pelosi did anything different with the latest impeachment press on the Ukraine call. He replies no. An impeachment inquiry was already going on. And you know that was certainly the claim even before we learned about the whistleblower report. Howell presses Letter whether the House impeachment inquiry is just Ukraine-focused. Interesting question. He replies that it's not. Right now, the media is focusing on that. So that's an interesting answer all by itself. Letter says Pelosi has not limited the impeachment inquiry to Ukraine. He explains how the 6 committees, will get together and share their potential articles against Trump to House leadership. Then, the House Judiciary Committee will report any articles to the full House. Letter says the House Judiciary Committee could easily include articles of impeachment against Trump dealing with obstruction of justice and interference with a U.S. election. I can't emphasize enough, it's not just Ukraine, the House counsel says. I hope they really mean that. Judge Howell honing in on what is the need for various specific Mueller grand jury redactions. She cites an example about Michael Flynn and notes the House isn't trying to impeach Michael Flynn. Letter checks with his co-counsel and says they don't need that one. I mean, I'd take it, though. Howell says she doesn't want to go page by page on all redactions, and Letter doesn't want to do it either. Howell cites the Michael Cohen guilty plea for lying to Congress and asks if the House Judiciary Committee wants materials to avoid being misled by witnesses. Absolutely, Your Honor, Letter replies. Letter says the House needs to see McGahn grand jury materials to tell whether he's telling the truth or if Trump is trying to further obstruct justice when he says McGahn is lying. That could be another impeachment article against the president, Letter says. Judge Howell notes this next line of questioning is a little off topic, but she asks, does President Trump have to have committed a crime to be impeached? Letter replies, no, he does not. Howell, can a president be impeached for lying to the American people? Letter replies, I believe so, yes, absolutely. Then they talk about the articles of impeachment against President Clinton, I guess including an example of that. And I believe Nixon caught one of those too, but it wasn't adopted. None of them were, so, they got away with that one. Letter closes his arguments noting this is the only time the House is aware of where the DOJ has opposed grand jury material release in an impeachment proceeding. Frankly, we're baffled why suddenly this practice over many decades is now reversed, he says. They're not baffled, but there's, that's the polite word for it. We know why he's doing it. He's trying to obstruct justice, and all by itself it's an impeachment or an impeachable act, but we don't want to confuse the issue for the moment. The Department of Justice's Elizabeth Shapiro was next up, defending the government's position that the grand jury materials should not go to the House. Shapiro explained the House sent a broad subpoena for 33 of the FBI 302s. The DOJ is in the process of producing them to the panel. Redactions that have been made are for confidential or presidential communications, but not for executive privilege, she says, which means, of course, there are probably some for executive privilege. We'll find that out later. Judge Howell says she wants, by close of business from DOJ, how many 302s have been so produced, let's say, and any material in them that's being withheld so I can evaluate the department's argument that there's no particularized need to show all this information. Next up, they're talking about the FOIA cases, Epic, BuzzFeed, and others that are out there trying to pry loose all parts of the Mueller report. Shapiro says there is no constant proceeding by DOJ to remove redactions absent those lawsuits. Judge Howell presses the DOJ to say whether any of the 13 Mueller requests for material from foreign governments included grand jury items. She asks if DOJ is blocking Congress from getting info that already was given to foreign governments. Shapiro says she'll get the answer. Guess she doesn't know. Shapiro goes on to argue the House now needs to show some degree of formality that it's doing impeachment. Howell responds and says, well, I agree, but I agree that a vote would make my life very much easier, but short of that, what degree of formality is the department saying I need to look for? Shapiro says, we're not advocating any specific line. Howell says, that is so not helpful. That's true. They feel like it needs to be something more than it is now, but they can't say what, which is really, of course, an indication that this is fine or they have no idea what they're looking for. They're simply saying this isn't enough because the business of saying this isn't enough takes time. And they're just looking to burn clock at this point. They don't really have any idea in mind what the House would have to do. They can't make a credible argument for why there would need to be a formal vote on the House floor, given the prerogatives granted to each House of Congress by the Constitution. So they don't want to get into that because it's going to come down to this. The judge is going to say, doesn't the Constitution give each House the power to determine its own rules of proceeding? And they're going to have to say, yeah, but we didn't really like the ones that they came up with. We think that they should be different. And the judge will say, well, but based on what? What would I order here? What would be my authority for ordering that thing you want? We don't know. So rather than have that conversation, they say, well, we're not saying specifically that there has to be a vote. Well, what are you saying? Well, we're not sure what we're saying is what they're saying. We just know that whatever they've done to this point is insufficient. But of course, if you can't demonstrate what would be sufficient, how do I know that you're serious about the insufficiency of what's here now? And the answer is I don't. Anyway, Howell goes on to say that based on the D.C. Circuit and SCOTUS precedent, I owe enormous deference to how the House decides it's in impeachment proceedings. Am I misreading those cases, she asks. Shapiro argues if DOJ wants the Mueller grand jury materials, it could pass a law. It says DOJ, but I guess they mean the House. If the House wanted Mueller grand jury materials, it could pass a law to change the rules on this. That's true. The federal rules of evidence and federal rules of criminal procedure, all the rules can be changed legislatively. So the House, I don't know, but it's a bad argument in that Shapiro argues that if Congress really is if the House wants the Mueller grand jury materials, it could pass a law to change the rules on this. It's just that the rules change would never pass the Senate. And I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's a statutory change. So I guess the president could veto it as well. So there's that. So I'm not at all sure that that's helpful. If one house can veto the other house's desire to declare itself in impeachment mode, that would be the prerogative of the House. The Senate has the sole power to try impeachments, but it doesn't have the power to impeach anyone. By extension, the Senate should not be presumed to have the power to tell the House that it isn't impeaching anybody. That power solely belongs to the House. That means two things. One, the Senate can't say that the House isn't in impeachment, and giving them a unilateral opportunity, a unicameral veto on the other house's power to declare what its rules say is unconstitutional. And it's probably unconstitutional as well, injusticiable for the Article 3 branch to tell Congress that it can't declare itself, one house of Congress, that it can't declare itself to be in impeachment mode. But they have to have this argument. I mean, that's what the DOJ and the administration are after here. We know we'll lose. We just want to burn time doing so. All right. So let's see. Howell has made a couple of side points worth mentioning. She points out the DOJ's policy that a sitting president can't be indicted has never been addressed in court. She also notes the Mueller probe at about 22 months was, quote, among the shortest special counsel investigations ever. So that's a good talking point to have in your pocket, too, every time Republicans talk about how much time and money was wasted on the Mueller report. Worth pointing out, it's one of the shortest special counsel investigations ever. Okay, so that was it for the on-the-spot tweeting that I managed to gather up prior to recording the show, and I think that brings us up to speed on what happened yesterday, absent a more coherent published account of it. But I'll search around and see if we can't find something that fits that bill, and we can circle back around to it in either just a minute or two, depending on how easy it is to find, or later on in the show. Well, as a matter of fact, I have come up with Darren Samuelson's organized thoughts after all, and he has published them a little earlier than I thought. Judge signals Dems may get to see Mueller's secrets. That's the title of the piece published in Politico. Federal judge signaled Tuesday that she might give House Democrats access to some of Robert Mueller's remaining secrets, but of course she would be providing it to the House Judiciary Committee. I wonder about that. I wonder how the suit is styled. Do they name the plaintiffs as being the Democrats of the committee? I hope not. Anyway, during a 2-hour-plus hearing, Beryl Howell, Chief Judge for the U.S. District Court, pointedly challenged the Justice Department to explain its extraordinary position, that in scare quotes again, extraordinary position of trying to block lawmakers from seeing the special counsel's grand jury materials, which include testimony and evidence that has been kept private since the Mueller probe ended in March. Grand jury material is protected by law, but judges can release information under special circumstances. If Howell ultimately rules in Democrats' favor, it would represent a major legal victory for them that could help expand Congress's impeachment inquiry of President Donald Trump. While the probe initially started earlier this year with a broader focus on Mueller's findings, the Democrats in recent weeks have homed in this telling, on the president's alleged attempt to pressure Ukraine into investigating former Vice President Joe Biden and his family. Howell on Tuesday said that both under Supreme Court and federal appellate court precedent, she must give enormous deference to House Democrats, really the Judiciary Committee, and their interest in the grand jury materials because of their impeachment inquiry. She even indicated that the impeachment probe was a precursor for releasing the Mueller materials. The judge, an appointee of President Barack Obama, didn't issue an opinion Tuesday in the Democrats' 3-month-old, lawsuit, but her comments offered the House a glimmer of hope that it may still get to see several blacked-out words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, and entire pages from the report Mueller released in April summarizing his probe. During Tuesday's hearing, the top lawyer for the Democrats told Howell that the House impeachment inquiry still includes issues tied to the Mueller probe and hasn't just been whittled down to Trump's efforts to pressure the president of Ukraine into launching an investigation of his political opponents. Can't emphasize enough, it's not just Ukraine, House Counsel Doug Letter said, adding that the Judiciary Committee could easily adopt articles of impeachment against Trump that deal with the Mueller-related themes of obstruction of justice and election interference. So let's see. It says House Democrats filed their initial lawsuit seeking the Mueller grand jury materials in late July, arguing that they need to peer behind hundreds of redactions from Mueller's nearly 450-page report to help them determine whether Trump and other key witnesses have been telling the truth in their sworn testimony. Because if they haven't, they're obstructing justice, you see. One example Letter gave Tuesday was the president's public statements claiming that former top White House lawyer Don McGahn lied to Mueller's investigators. If the Democrats determined Trump wasn't telling the truth, it could end up being another impeachment article against him, Letter said. Elizabeth Shapiro, head of the DOJ Civil Division, countered that Democrats should be denied access to the Mueller grand jury materials, arguing that a congressional impeachment proceeding doesn't meet the criteria to release them. And even if the court did rule that a congressional impeachment should free up grand jury material, she noted that the House hasn't actually done anything to formally declare an impeachment process. Indeed, the House has yet to hold an official vote on the matter. Howell said she agreed that the House vote to authorize impeachment proceedings would make my life very much easier in ordering the release of the Mueller materials, but even without that vote, Howell said she still likely was obligated to give the House what it said it needed. For his part, Letter argued that the House only has to announce it's holding an impeachment investigation, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has put her stamp on the chamber doing exactly that. She's totally on board with this. This is the position of the House, said Letter, who explained that he speaks with Pelosi regularly and had a conversation about the court hearings with the California congressman on Monday night. It says congressman. Tuesday's hearing included a number of other illuminating exchanges involving Howell, who oversaw the Mueller grand jury as the top judge in the federal court in Washington, D.C. She pressed Shapiro repeatedly to explain whether Mueller's team had perhaps already shared grand jury information with foreign governments, given that it made 13 requests to overseas officials during its probe. I'd like to know how much of this information the department is resisting giving to the U.S. Congress has already been shared with foreign government officials. It's a good question. I don't know if it settles anything, but it's a good question. Howell asked Letter point blank whether a president could be impeached for lying to the public. Of course, he says yes. We remember that. Several other comments indicative of her attention to the Mueller case and the Trump presidency. She, it's reported here, noted that the longstanding DOJ policy that a sitting president can't be indicted has never really been tested in court. That the Mueller probe is actually relatively short. At another point, during an exchange over Trump's claims about his former aides giving misleading testimony, the judge interjected, "I can't keep up with what the president says, to be honest." Central to the House Democrats' push for the Mueller materials is the historical precedent that DOJ, in all previous impeachment investigations involving presidents and judges, did not fight Congress over access to grand jury materials. Frankly, we're baffled why suddenly this practice over many decades is now reversed, Letter said. Howell picked up on that point by pressing DOJ to say whether then U.S. District Court Judge John Sirica was wrong in 1974 to let Congress access a detailed roadmap, remember that thing, of the Watergate grand jury materials as it considered President Richard Nixon's impeachment. Shapiro argued that if the same Watergate roadmap case arose today, there'd be a different result because the law has changed since 1974. She said the judge wouldn't be able to do the same thing absent changes to the grand jury rules and statutes. Howell sounded skeptical. Wow, okay, she replied. That does sound a little skeptical, doesn't it? Democrats have faced resistance at nearly every turn in their push for materials central to the impeachment investigation. A separate lawsuit seeking McGahn's testimony via subpoena will be argued October 31st before a different federal judge. I guess that's the one where they're actually looking for enforcement of a subpoena by court order. So that tells us what we were looking for before. We have to wait until Halloween for that case to even be argued. So I guess another use of the Halloweenish music. Sound effects, anyway. October 31st. So trick or treat, we would like you to enforce our subpoena. Trick or treat, smell my feet, give me criminal rap to beat. I don't know how we would try and make that rhyme, and it won't even be criminal, so I'm wrong about that. The Trump administration, well, maybe it will be. I don't know. The Trump administration also stymied several demands for documents and depositions connected to the Ukraine affair. We'll be back in court on that one and probably be 3 months behind the end of October, and everyone's going to start getting nervous about things wrapping up. I don't think it's possible for them to get done for Thanksgiving, which was once floated out there. I don't know whether that was a serious thought or something that was just supposed to maybe make moderates comfortable. I don't know what that was meant to do, but there's no way that they're going to get there. On the Mueller grand jury materials, Shapiro said DOJ is in the process of producing FBI notes to the House for 33 interviews tied to the special counsel investigation. That, by the way, is what they were talking about when they were talking about 302s. That's the FBI's forms that they file summarizing the results of interviews with witnesses or other people of interest in the case. So they're in the process of producing the FBI's notes, the 302s, to the House for 33 interviews tied to the special counsel investigation. There had been delays because of decisions to redact materials labeled confidential or involving presidential communications, but the claim is that they're, remember, not doing any of this on the basis of executive privilege. Let's see, anything else that we didn't get in the first read-through? Well, let's see, a comment on the record by Jerry Nadler. Let's see what he has to say. We are gratified at the seriousness with which the court addressed our petition for grand jury information relating to the House impeachment inquiry. We remain confident in our case and look forward to the resolution of this matter. Wow, that was super exciting. So that really, what a capper, honestly, to reading about the things in live tweets and then the more organized discussion of it after the fact. Okay, I think that closes out this subject for now, but it's an important part of the development of the investigation, and I'm hopeful that we'll get an answer, and we'll get an answer quick. Then, of course, the next stage after that is total frustration as the case is appealed to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and then we'll see what happens. There might not be law after this. We'll find out. Okay, there's also a little bit more out there to add. I guess we might as well use this as a catch-up day on more things to add. Not that you could eat the ketchup today. Don't do that. On the Ukraine or the Ukraine situation. I keep inaccurately or incorrectly referring to Ukraine, the country, as the Ukraine, the province, which it isn't unless you are Russian. And let's see. The latest bit probably comes as no surprise, but I thought I would at least add this in so that we are all up to speed on this stuff. ABC News reporting that a White House official told the whistleblower that the Trump-Ukraine call was frightening. I guess we're getting some sense of where the whistleblower's information came from, which is what Donald Trump has been after from the beginning. So I don't know, maybe this is helpful for him. But we'll learn about it here from Catherine Faulders, Justin Fischel, and Ann Flaherty from ABC News, who write, a White House official listening to President Donald Trump's July 25th phone call. That is first-hand information, not hearsay. Wow. What the phone call with Ukraine's president described the call as, quote, crazy and, quote, frightening, and was, quote, visibly shaken, according to notes taken by the intelligence official who filed a formal whistleblower complaint after speaking with the official and others. Okay, so this is, well, we'll call it the whistleblower's first-hand account of this other White House official's first-hand account of the phone call. That's at least helps explain the provenance of how the whistleblower came to believe this about the phone call, if he or she never heard the phone call. ABC News has learned that the 2-page memo written by the whistleblower a day after Trump's call suggests that at least one aide to the president feared that Trump's own words in the call were damning. According to a rough transcript of the call released by the White House, which isn't really a transcript, Trump asked Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky to launch an investigation into a political opponent, Democratic candidate Joe Biden, and his son. The notes were based on a brief conversation between the whistleblower and the White House official and described highlights from the president's call. The document was later provided to the intelligence community's inspector general, who reviewed the whistleblower's complaint. The IG has determined the complaint appeared credible and of urgent concern. The White House has not responded to a request for comment. They'll be denying it by the time you hear the show tomorrow, probably in spectacular fashion and proclaiming the president a very stable genius or something like that. Trump has defended the call as acting on his duty as president to end corruption, quote, even if that means requesting the help of a foreign country or countries, but not if you don't even try to handle it inside of your own country, I would argue. This has nothing to do with politics or a political campaign against the Bidens. Trump tweeted on October 4th, this does have to do with their corruption, exclamation point. And like we said, top of the line corruption in Ukraine. They were worried about every $50,000, I am sure. Trump has also dismissed the whistleblower's account of the phone call because, he says, the complaint was based on secondhand information. According to the IG report, the individual had both first and secondhand information. This week, a second whistleblower has come forward with what that person's lawyer describes as firsthand knowledge. So that's yet another source in all this. The president urged Zelensky to investigate the Bidens and stated that Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, would discuss this topic further with Zelensky during his trip to Kiev. The unnamed White House official told the first whistleblower, according to the notes. The official, who listened to the entirety of the phone call, was visibly shaken by what had transpired and seemed keen to inform a trusted colleague with the U.S. national security apparatus, within the apparatus, about the call, the whistleblower writes in the memo. The memo states the official described the call as crazy, frightening, and completely lacking in substance related to national security, which of course makes it all the more troubling that it ended up on this code word only server. But okay. After the call, the whistleblower says, quote, I returned to my office and wrote up my best recollection of what I had heard. The person notes they did not review the call transcript or written notes, but the official informed me they exist. The official recalled to the whistleblower that the president also asked the Ukrainian leader about the CrowdStrike server in a reference to a debunked theory that Ukraine is holding Hillary Clinton's missing emails and that it was Ukraine, not Russia, that was behind the interference in the 2016 election. The White House official also correctly recalled that the president raised the issue of Burisma Holdings, the company that employed Vice President Joe Biden's son, Hunter. Importantly, the whistleblower also documented suspicions from the White House official that notes or transcripts from the call were being protected in an unusual manner. ABC News has reported that the White House changed its practice of storing phone call transcripts with foreign leaders to avoid leaking by keeping them in secure servers with restricted access. It was unclear if those conversations, however, were being protected for reasons of national security or for political reasons. So, about what we expected, I think, given the way the story has unfolded so far. But just wanted to let you know that there was, of course, a tie or some confirmation of the information and the provenance of it and how it came to the attention of the whistleblower. So we wanted to keep up to speed on that. There's other information here that's really kind of interesting too. I'm going to turn here to the New York Review of Books. Not often called out here, but occasionally. And the writer here is Murray Wass, a old hand and old Netroots denizen hand at investigative reporting. Look at this. This is interesting. Ukraine continued, how appropriate, how a crucial witness escaped. And this is a really interesting story. A classified State Department assessment concluded in 2018 that Ukraine's former prosecutor general, Yuri Lutsenko, remember him, who was at the center of the impeachment inquiry of President Trump, had allowed a vital potential witness for special counsel Robert Mueller, Konstantin Kilimnik, remember him, to escape from Ukraine to Russia, beyond the reach of the United States, after a federal grand jury in the U.S. charged Kilimnik with obstruction of justice. Isn't that something? He escaped to Russia, who's our friend, and will, of course, turn him over to us for questioning because they have nothing to hide, right? Had Kilimnik been extradited to the United States, he had the potential to provide invaluable information to investigators that might have shed light on one of the most consequential, unresolved questions that the American people deserve an answer to: whether the former chairman to President Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, Paul Manafort, and perhaps other aides to then presidential candidate Trump, conspired with Russia to aid Russia's covert operations to intervene in the election to defeat Hillary Clinton and elect Trump. By allowing Kilimnik to escape to Russia, Lutsenko foreclosed any possibility that Kilimnik would ever be questioned by U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agents. Isn't that something? I demand an investigation into Trump's interference with and pressure on the former Ukrainian prosecutor general to intervene in an ongoing probe by the FBI and the United States law enforcement to obstruct justice, of course, and to protect himself. I think it's amazing that, like everything else, his request for an inquiry into the inquiries being conducted by the Ukrainian prosecutor general is, will be projection. It was all, once again, projection. I did this. I interceded with the Ukrainian prosecutor general to protect myself. Therefore, Joe Biden must have done the same at some point. That's amazing. What an interesting story. And I mean, it was all hanging out there. We knew that Kilimnik was gone. I don't know whether we ever mentioned this or not, but this is a great parallel. Thanks, Murray, for writing this one up. I'm going to continue on with this. In making their assessment, U.S. officials interviewed Ukrainian office holders, prosecutors, and sources within the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, or NABU, an anti-corruption agency that, like the FBI, investigates malfeasance, but does not have the authority to bring criminal charges. Created in 2015 with the support of European Union nations and the Obama administration, NABU has uncovered evidence implicating many of Ukraine's most powerful political and business leaders and oligarchs in serious criminal conduct, only to see potential cases languish when referred to Lutsenko's office, which of course was a problem with Shukin as well, or Shokin, whatever his name was. NABU officials also more specifically told the State Department that not only had Lutsenko allowed Kilimnik to flee to Moscow, but that he also thwarted several investigations of Manafort. Gee whiz, the projection is really just overwhelming here. The State Department at the time did not look into the possibility that Lutsenko allowed Kilimnik to leave Ukraine at the encouragement of anyone associated with President Trump. One former senior U.S. diplomatic official explained to me, "I don't think anyone ever seriously considered it because it would have seemed implausible." In other words, it's one of those things like, well, you're not accusing the president of espionage here, are you? Yes, I am. Oh, well, golly, that seems unlikely. Yeah, but so did asking for a quid pro quo directly from the Ukrainian president, until last week. In recent days, however, it has been disclosed that President Trump had pressured Ukraine's new president, Volodymyr Zelensky, to order his new prosecutor general to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter to benefit Trump's 2020 re-election campaign. That he pressured Zelensky to reinstate Lutsenko, of all people, whom Zelensky had fired, to his former position, threatening to withhold, I didn't even realize that was part of the demand, threatening to withhold almost $400 million in military and security aid to Ukraine. This same official told me today it hardly appears implausible anymore that people around the president would have asked Ukrainian officials to interfere with the Mueller investigation. This same person now recommends that the House committee conducting the impeachment inquiry of Trump expand its probe to investigate the matter of Kilimnik's escape to Russia as well. Kim Whaley, I'm guessing at the pronunciation of W-E-H-L-E, formerly an assistant U.S. attorney and a constitutional scholar and professor at the University of Baltimore Law School, told me that if President Trump helped Kilimnik avoid standing trial or testifying in the U.S., that might constitute obstruction of justice, as well as other high crimes and misdemeanors bearing on impeachment as envisioned by the Founding Fathers, like taking care that the law be faithfully executed, for instance. To do anything to prevent a witness from testifying, here by manipulating the massive power of your high office to protect yourself from potential criminal liability or impeachment jeopardy, might be an impeachable offense, Whaley said. For more than a decade, Kilimnik had been Manafort's right-hand man in Kiev. During that time, the two men collected tens of millions of dollars in fees as political consultants for Viktor Yanukovych, who served as the president of Ukraine from 2010 to 2014. Yanukovych advocated that his country sever ties with the United States and other Western nations and align itself more closely with Vladimir Putin's Russia. Manafort and Kilimnik also consulted with Yanukovych's political party, the Party of Regions, and with Ukrainian and Russian oligarchs with close ties to Yanukovych and Putin. According to evidence contained in the Mueller report, throughout 2016, Manafort shared confidential polling data from inside the Trump campaign with Kilimnik regarding 4 states Manafort presciently believed might go for Trump: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Manafort, in turn, instructed Kilimnik to turn over the polling data to a former client, Oleg Deripaska, a Russian oligarch who's close to Putin. During the course of his investigation, the special counsel also disclosed that Kilimnik himself was a former Russian intelligence officer who still has ties to a Russian intelligence service and had such ties in 2016. A covert social media campaign by operatives working for Russia's military intelligence service, the GRU, was then already working to defeat Hillary Clinton and elect Trump. Russian agents intensified their targeting of voters in those 4 states in the final days of the campaign. Trump went on to win the presidency by winning Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by a margin of fewer than 80,000 votes cast in all 3 of those states, out of a total of 136 million ballots cast in total across the country. In Michigan, the vote was so close that if more than 5,400 had voted for Clinton, she would have won the state. Or I guess if another 5,400 had voted. Okay. I don't know why it says it that way. Just an error. Besides Manafort and Kilimnik, the special counsel had no other potential witness who could say whether the polling information was shared with Russia. After having been convicted of 8 felony counts of money laundering, tax avoidance, and bank fraud in August of 2018, and facing additional serious charges, Manafort agreed to cooperate with Mueller's prosecutors in exchange for leniency. He pledged to fully, truthfully, and completely and forthrightly answer any questions the special counsel's investigators wanted to ask. Manafort is currently awaiting trial on 16 additional charges, including mortgage fraud brought by the Manhattan district attorney. But Manafort's cooperation was a ruse. Only 3 months later, the special counsel asserted in federal court that Manafort had broken his cooperation agreement by telling prosecutors and FBI agents multiple discernible lies. Among these deceptions, the special counsel alleged was that Manafort lied to the special counsel and the grand jury concerning his interactions and communications with Konstantin Kilimnik about Trump campaign polling. That left Kilimnik as the only other living witness from whom the special counsel might have had a chance of compelling the truth. In June of 2018, Manafort and Kilimnik were indicted by a federal grand jury, with Kilimnik facing charges of witness tampering and obstruction of justice. If extradited back to the U.S. and convicted, Kilimnik faced years in prison. That would have given prosecutors leverage to compel Kilimnik to tell the truth about whether Manafort's polling data was provided to Russian intelligence officials to help elect Trump. But when Lutsenko arranged for Kilimnik to slip across the border, he eliminated the last likely possibility for the American people to learn the truth. Which I'm wondering now, thinking about how when he recanted his story and changed it and stopped backing Trump's conspiracy theory claims about Biden, people thought, oh, well, I wonder if maybe he'll end up being the hero in all this. Apparently, No hero. Classified State Department records say that in allowing Kilimnik to flee, Lutsenko was working with and at the direction of several senior officials in the administration of then Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, who served from 2014 until 2019 when he was replaced by Zelensky. The records indicate that U.S. officials believed it was highly unlikely that Lutsenko had acted without Poroshenko's personal approval. The State Department assessment noted that Ukraine was awaiting military aid from the Trump administration, and therefore Poroshenko was seeking favor with the Trump administration. Trump's decision to withhold and delay congressionally approved military aid to Ukraine has now become a central matter of interest to the House impeachment inquiry. The State Department records further observe that Lutsenko had sought to act in the tradition of other Ukrainian prosecution, that's what it says, other prosecutors, I guess, pursuing investigation to discredit and imprison enemies and protect his own political allies. That assessment is shared by the whistleblower, whose complaint led to the impeachment proceedings. The whistleblower's memo to the intelligence community's inspector general asserted that Lutsenko has no legal training and has been widely criticized in Ukraine for politicizing criminal probes and using his tenure as a prosecutor general to protect corrupt Ukrainian officials. It is unclear whether President Trump and Rudy Giuliani were aware of this information about Lutsenko when Giuliani and Lutsenko, according to Lutsenko, spoke or met about 10 times, and President Trump pressed Ukraine's new president, Zelensky, to reinstate Lutsenko after Zelensky had fired him. But there was an extensive public record regarding what Lutsenko had done before Giuliani had first spoken to Lutsenko on May 2nd, 2018. Andrew Kramer of the New York Times, who works from the newspaper's Moscow bureau, reported that Ukrainian officials had shut down 4 Manafort-related potential cases, each one having been, quote, effectively frozen by Ukraine's chief prosecutor. Kramer explained, the cases are just too sensitive for a government deeply reliant on United States financial and military aid, and keenly aware of Mr. Trump's distaste for the investigation by the special counsel, Robert Mueller. The decision to halt the investigation by an anti-corruption prosecutor was handed down at a delicate moment for Ukraine as the Trump administration was finalizing plans to sell the country sophisticated anti-tank missiles called Javelins. Just a pause here to point out then that in order to curry favor enough to buy the Javelins, Ukrainian officials, in this case Lutsenko and Poroshenko, decided they would block the prosecution of Kilimnik and I guess arrange for him to escape to Moscow. They did so, thereby protecting Trump, but still didn't get the money and the weapons. Now, that might be because there was a new president elected here, and Trump wanted to extract something else, I guess, because he felt he could extract something else from Zelensky. But what ended up happening here is Ukraine was asked for the favor of letting Kilimnik escape to Moscow, probably in their minds, if not explicitly, in exchange for the delivery of these weapons. Ukraine delivered, let Kilimnik go, and they still didn't get him. Trump backed out of that and said, no, I want more from the new incoming administration. I also want an investigation of Biden. I don't know whether if Poroshenko had won and stayed in office, whether Trump would have backed out or upped his demands again or not. But it seems pretty likely because he's a scumbag and that's the way he operates. Now, back to the story. In May of 2018, 3 Democratic U.S. senators, Pat Leahy of Vermont, Richard Durbin of Illinois, and Bob Menendez of New Jersey, alarmed by Lutsenko's decision to freeze several investigations related to Ukrainian dealings of Trump's former campaign chair Manafort, wrote to Lutsenko, "We are writing to express great concern about reports that your office has taken steps to impede cooperation with the United States Special Counsel Robert Mueller. This reported refusal to cooperate with the Mueller probe also sends a worrying signal to the Ukrainian people as well as to the international community." This, by the way, was later criticized. I think we read about this on the air, that Trump viewed that as, oh, aren't you asking for a quid pro quo? You're saying that you might not approve appropriations of aid to Ukraine unless this is straightened out. But again, look at the claim that they're making. We're worried that you are letting corrupt officials leave and you're not cooperating with the Mueller probe. That's a problem, and you're going to need to cooperate if you're going to want to get our money. Now, Trump claims to see no difference here, but again, just for beginners, in case you haven't, picked up on this, what you're not allowed to do, I mean, I get where Pompeo was going when he said the other day, oh, goodness gracious, we do this all the time. I'll help you with X if you'll help us with Y. Yes, but here, what you're looking to avoid is, I will use United States government property or money or materials or whatever, the power of the United States government. I will use something belonging to the government to trade you in exchange for something of personal benefit to me or of political benefit to me, specifically campaign benefit. Also out of bounds. And it doesn't have to be a bribe going into my pocket, but if it's about electing me, that's a problem. Whereas if it's an exchange for a goal of U.S. policy, where the benefit goes to the people paying the price, and really, I mean, I guess even if you did both things personally, it would be a big mistake because, of course, you'd be leveraging the power of the office in an unspoken manner. I'd like you to do me a personal favor in exchange for personal payment would be just as wrong, but an even greater wrong, really. I said just as wrong, but I guess it's different in kind, actually. But I blew that up right away by saying an even greater wrong. But what I mean here is what you can't do is take taxpayer money and say, I'll give you other people's money if you give me personally something of value that only I can cash in on. That's not good. Of course, in Trump's mind, it's of benefit to the United States government that he be elected because he thinks he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But that's not the way most other people see it when it comes to stuff like this. Here, at least, the Democrats in Congress are saying, if you do this thing which is of benefit to the United States government, help this official investigation of the government, we will help your government with money from our government. Republicans would argue, of course, well, this is of political benefit to you. You guys, Durbin, Leahy, Menendez, all stand to do better politically, and your party stands to do better politically if there's cooperation with the special counsel. Yes, that's true, but the special counsel, despite the fact that it hurts one party and might possibly help another, is not regarded this way. It is an official function of the United States government, like it or not. You see what this distinction I'm making? I mean, Trump, of course, thinks that's, from outer space. He claims not to understand that, but I think most other people do. Anyway, Lutsenko made no reply to the three senators who wrote, but the State Department cable traffic provides an affirmative answer, finding that Lutsenko had indeed worked to thwart the special counsel's work. Consistent with this record is the fact that Giuliani found Lutsenko accommodating of Trump's wishes. During a meeting in January with Giuliani, Lutsenko agreed to direct his office to take steps to reopen investigations into a Ukrainian oligarch who had employed Hunter Biden, part of Giuliani's efforts to tarnish the image of a potential rival to Trump in the 2020 presidential race. Giuliani was reportedly so excited by Lutsenko's favorable response that he immediately called President Trump to tell him about what had just transpired. Giuliani and Lutsenko arranged for Lutsenko to be interviewed by journalists for pro-Trump outlets, to whom Lutsenko broke the news that he was investigating the Bidens. Soon, this news was amplified on Fox News, with Giuliani and Trump themselves both appearing at various times to out the story. It was a setback for Giuliani and Trump then, when Zelensky signaled in April that if elected, he planned to fire Lutsenko from his post as prosecutor general. He waited only until July to do so, after parliamentary elections had reinforced his mandate. Throughout the State Department and U.S. intelligence agencies, Lutsenko's firing was viewed as an important first step of reform after the corrupt Poroshenko administration. The State Department, after all, knew that Lutsenko was not only helping Giuliani and Trump, but had also frustrated Mueller's investigation and helped Kilimnik and thereby Manafort too. Thus, in his July 25th phone call with Zelensky, Trump pressured him to reinstate Lutsenko, whom Zelensky had removed, and allow him to continue his investigation of the Bidens and other political adversaries of the president. Adversaries, you like to say adversaries on that one? Okay. Just prior to the phone call, President Trump decided to hold back almost $400 million in military aid to Ukraine. He's constantly holding it back, no matter what the Ukrainians do. Note to the Ukraine folks, it's not worth working with him. Trump also complained to Zelensky about Lutsenko's firings. I heard you had a prosecutor who was very good. Oh, and yes, and he was shut down, and that's really unfair. Going into the voice here. A lot of people are talking about that. Makes me laugh when he says that. The way they shut down your very good prosecutor, and you had some very bad people involved. That expansive Trump vocabulary just busting through. I wanted to tell you about the prosecutor, Zelensky replied. First of all, I understand and I'm knowledgeable about the situation. I'm the effing president, for God's sake. Since we have won the absolute majority in our parliament, the next prosecutor will be 100% my person, my candidate, who will be approved by the parliament and will start as a new prosecutor in September. It was evident from the memorandum of the July 25th conversation that Zelensky was extremely careful to show deference toward Trump and placate him wherever possible. But on this matter, tellingly, Zelensky has asserted himself and held absolutely firm. In their letter to Lutsenko in 2018, the three U.S. senators wrote, "Ours is a relationship built on a foundation of respect for the rule of law and accountable democratic institutions." The senators lectured the Ukrainian prosecutor that by allowing for the politicization of their criminal justice system, especially to protect their political allies and undermine their political adversaries, sending a very worrying signal to their own people as well as the international community, they could have just as easily been writing about their own country. Yes, very interesting and quite an interesting angle. Makes me think of a couple of stories that might be a good follow-up to that. And there are 2, 3 possibly that I can think of that might follow on. Let me see. How long is this one? The New York Times had a piece here by Michael Schwartz. Not Schwartz, but Schwartz. It says W-I-R-T-Z. S-C-H-W-I-R-T-Z. An interesting thing. I guess playing off of... Here's what we'll do. We'll do these 2 articles. Playing off of the mention in Murray's article that the idea that the president was just outright asking for quid pro quo in this situation. No quid pro quo, no quid pro quo, wait, whatever. And considering that or for other officials to have thought, gosh, it's just so unlikely that the president would just blurt this out, right? It would seem so implausible. Well, let's talk about some things first that make it plausible, perhaps. I guess from the Russian side, or rather, I guess I should say, well, looking back, is this, is it that, let's say the State Department, looking back at the paragraph we were talking about, the State Department at the time did not look into the possibility that Lutsenko allowed Kilimnik to leave Ukraine at the encouragement of anyone associated with President Trump. Okay, so 2 questions here. Is it likely that Lutsenko let the guy go? I guess that's somewhat likely. He was already suspected of corruption. It was considered beyond the pale to just simply accept that President Trump might have done such a thing. I don't know where these people, have been living, but I guess early on, in early days, if you were a sucker, you might believe that that was the case. So therefore, you're going to have certain assumptions about the president, like what country does he represent or where are his allegiances? They're getting smarter about that in certain places. Let's see. So that's, that takes us a little bit off topic to explain why, and gets us away from the New York Times piece that I was about to discuss with you. But let me just pause for a second and figure out what's the best path forward here. See how long the two articles are and which one makes the most sense to start with. The one about the likelihood of high government officials being that blatantly corrupt, or the one about whether or not Russia would really be that underhanded, which of course they would. All right, I got it now. And by the way, for those of you wondering what the ruckus was in the background, that was my teenage son rummaging through a plastic bag of M&Ms and chewing them with his mouth open while he was listening to his music or video or something with noise-canceling headphones on. So he had no idea the ruckus he was causing in the back. Anyway, we work through those things here at KITM World Headquarters from time to time. All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to skip across the pond I guess we weren't just across the pond, we kept going all the way to Ukraine. Now we'll stop short in the UK, where Boris Johnson inexplicably is still the Prime Minister of the UK, even though evidence is mounting every day that he's an idiot and a danger to the nation. Apropos of that, I have some very surprising news from Thomas Coulson in Business Insider reporting, stupid pop-up. Anyone want to buy a fancy-ass wallet? That's what has just popped up in front of things. All right. Boris Johnson was blocked from accessing state secrets as foreign secretary. This was back before he was prime minister, because Downing Street believed he was a security risk. Isn't that interesting? This is not new news either. It's just news that's coming to my attention right now. But I thought I would take a quick look at it, and it's not that old. It's from July 5th, 2019, just 20 days before the phone call that revealed that Donald Trump needed to be once and for all regarded as a security risk when it comes to American national security. But here's the story. Lots of bullet points up top. We could just stick on those, but no, we'll read the whole thing. Theresa May repeatedly withheld sensitive intelligence from Boris Johnson when he was foreign secretary. I love that. There's a slightly British pronunciation to it. Secretary here, but secretary there. Foreign secretary, see? Because they believed he would leak the information. And he would. He's crazy. He's Trump. We all believe Trump will leak the information too. We just have greater difficulty withholding the information from him because he's in the top job. But in case you were wondering, whether it's ever plausible that a high-ranking government official for whom it would be absolutely absurd to be involved in such an interaction, such a leak, well, the UK believed it about Boris Johnson, but then they went and made him prime minister. The prime minister, that is May, wanted the then foreign secretary, although this is very interesting. It's a typo that says secretart. They've substituted the last Y. They've put in a T for that. It's secretart. Like that guy. That guy is a real secretart. I'm not even sure what that is supposed to be a play on, but it sounds pretty funny. The prime minister wanted the then foreign secretary to not be shown. This is typo ridden, really, in this day and age. Unbelievable. Here's what it actually says. The prime minister then wanted the foreign secretary to not to be shown. Right. To not be shown secretary. All right. To not be shown certain sensitive secret intelligence when he was appointed in July of 2016, BBC News reports, citing multiple security sources. Downing Street's move is said to have worried security chiefs at the time because of the foreign secretary's role in authorizing sensitive operations. Johnson is the favorite in the race to replace Theresa May. And guess what? He wins. As Conservative leader and Prime Minister at the end of July, he was aware of Downing Street's decision at the time and was very unhappy about it, the BBC reported. Sources close to Johnson insisted that there was no row, get it? All right, give it their pronunciation, about information access, and claimed he saw everything he needed to for his role. Johnson first visited the headquarters of MI6, the government's foreign intelligence service, as foreign secretary 3 months after his appointment, when he was shown around by its chief, Alex Younger. Johnson praised the work of the security services, unlike our own Donald Trump, who says they suck, and said, even from my relatively short period as foreign secretary, I can testify to how vital the work they do is. But at the same time, a row was taking place about whether Johnson should have access to all the intelligence produced by the UK's spies, the BBC reported, despite the fact ministerial responsibility lay with Johnson for MI6 and GCHQ, another branch of the intelligence service. One source described the attempt to limit Johnson's information access as control freakery on the part of Downing Street rather than a lack of trust in Johnson. Another said it was a combination of everyone's faults, citing the personal enmity between May and Johnson, as well as Johnson's lack of discipline. The report follows claims in 2017 that British spy chiefs were, quote, wary of sharing information with Johnson because they didn't trust him. The New Statesman reported at the time that multiple diplomats had doubts over Johnson's personal style as foreign secretary. A month previously, he had said the ISIS stronghold of Sirte, I'm guessing at the pronunciation of the Libyan city, could be the next Dubai once they clear the dead bodies away. That's just like dumb, not just, I don't know how much that makes me suspect him. But anyway, the party's 160,000 strong membership will vote to select either Jeremy Hunt or Johnson as the next prime minister next week. Guess what they did? Either candidate, or if you prefer, either candidate, who needs to secure a simple, either candidate needs, what's the who in there for? To secure a simple majority above 50%. Both contenders have said they are willing to leave the EU without a deal in October if Brussels is not willing to renegotiate. The rest apparently is history. But I just thought I would throw that in there in order to illustrate that, in some places, they don't let the title and the suit fool them into sharing intelligence. Although here it would be a much more difficult proposition to keep intelligence from the president if he is aware that it exists. If he's not aware, I guess it's an easier thing to do. All right. Now I can turn to a slightly different story that doesn't have to do quite as much work, because the job of it is to convince you that the Russians are underhanded and sneaky, and more underhanded and sneaky and dirty than perhaps you might have previously thought. However, if you stop and think about it, it's been part of the American popular culture since forever that the Russians do these sorts of things. But I guess seeing it laid out in the open in the newspaper is a little unusual. Top secret Russian unit seeks to destabilize Europe, security officials say. Well, how surprising, except for the fact that, of course, we always suspected that this was the case. And the Ukrainian prime minister in 2016 came to the United States and told the Republican House leadership, then the majority leadership in the House of Representatives, face-to-face, point-blank, exactly that. And they chose to either disbelieve it or do nothing about it, or, in the end, to keep silent about it, because it became obvious that Russia's meddling and destabilization of Western democracies around the world would be of benefit to the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is, of course, the party that does not believe in Western democracy anymore. That's how they knew it would inure to their benefit. Anyway, this was the Michael Schwartz piece. This one, a current piece, written, just yesterday on October 8th. First came a destabilization campaign in Moldova, followed by the poisoning of an arms dealer in Bulgaria, and then a thwarted coup in Montenegro. Last year, there was an attempt to assassinate a former Russian spy in Britain using a nerve agent. Remember that one. The other ones are less familiar. Though the operations bore the fingerprints of Russia's intelligence services, the authorities initially saw them as isolated, unconnected attacks. Western security officials have now concluded that these operations, and potentially many others, are part of a coordinated and ongoing campaign to destabilize Europe, executed by an elite unit inside the Russian intelligence system, skilled in subversion, sabotage, and assassination. All the good things that you like your spies to be able to do. The group, known as Unit 29155, like a zip code, I guess, has operated for at least a decade, yet Western officials only recently discovered it. And where is 29155? I wonder what zip code that corresponds to. Were they hiding there? No, probably not. I don't know what the number really means, but it would be fun to think of it as a zip code. Intelligence officials in 4 Western countries say it is unclear how often the unit is mobilized and warn that it is impossible to know when and where its operatives will strike. They would be trying to hide that information, I think. Yes. Unless, of course, Unit 29155, determined to strike in the United States, showed up in a presidential daily brief, which Trump wouldn't be reading, and we fall victim to it, or whatever. Now, the purpose of the unit, which has not previously been reported, underscores the degree to which the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, is actively fighting the West with his brand of so-called hybrid warfare, a blend of propaganda, hacking attacks, and disinformation, as well as open military confrontation. In other words, it's a new kind of war. We're in that war, and helping the Russians with that war would be treason. Just want to point that out before we read any further. I think we had forgotten how organically ruthless the Russians could be, said Peter Zwak, a retired military intelligence officer and former defense attaché at the United States Embassy in Moscow, who said he was not aware of the unit's existence. I don't think you really need to be aware of the unit's existence to think that, though. In a text message, Dmitry S. Peskov, Mr. Putin's spokesman, directed questions about the unit to the Russian Defense Ministry. That's a dumb question. I mean, you got to ask, I guess, but come on. The ministry did not respond to requests for comment. Please tell us about your most highly secretive, most sensitive intelligence and blah, blah, blah about your spies, please. Would you mind texting that to us? I think we won't. Hidden behind concrete walls at the headquarters of the 161st Special Purpose Specialist Training Center in eastern Moscow, the unit sits within the command hierarchy of the Russian Military Intelligence Agency, widely known as the GRU. Though much about GRU operations remains a mystery, Western intelligence agencies have begun to get a clearer picture of its underlying architecture. In the months before the 2016 presidential election, American officials say 2 GRU cyber units, known as 26165, also sounds like a zip code, and 74455, they love the 5-digit numbers, hacked into the servers of the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign, and then published embarrassing internal communications. Last year, Robert S. Mueller III, do you know about that guy? He's the special counsel overseeing the inquiry into Russian interference in the 2016 elections, not the 2018 elections, not the 2014 elections, the 2016 elections. Well, he indicted more than a dozen officers from those units, though all still remain at large, obviously. The hacking teams mostly operate from Moscow, thousands of miles from their targets. By contrast, officers from Unit 29155 travel to and from European countries. Some are decorated veterans of Russia's bloodiest wars, including Afghanistan, Chechnya, and Ukraine. Hey, Ukraine. Its operations are so secret, according to assessments by Western intelligence services, that the unit's existence is most likely unknown even to other GRU operatives, unless they read the New York Times. Which, really, they should. If somebody's going to pay for a Times subscription, it might as well be Russia, I'd say. By the way, interesting that they include Ukraine as among Russia's bloodiest wars, up there with Afghanistan and Chechnya. Do they? I mean, do they do it? The New York Times just did it. Is that because it's the only wars we can think of that modern Russia is actually waging, or what? Not sure. The unit appears to be a tight-knit community. A photograph taken in 2017 shows the unit's commander, Major General Andrei V. Avaryanov, at his daughter's wedding in a gray suit and bow tie. Okay. He is posing with Colonel Anatoly V. Chepiga, maybe. One of two officers indicted in Britain over the poisoning of a former spy, Sergei Skripal. This is a unit of the GRU that has been active over the years across Europe, said one European security official who spoke on a condition of anonymity to describe classified intelligence matters. It's been a surprise that the Russians, the GRU, this unit, have felt free to go ahead and carry out this extreme malign activity in friendly countries. That's been a shock. To varying degrees, each of the 4 operations linked to the unit attracted public attention, even as it took time for the authorities to confirm that they were connected. Western intelligence agencies first identified the unit after the failed 2016 coup in Montenegro, which involved a plot by 2 unit officers to kill the country's prime minister and seize the parliament building. That's a shade more audacious than what they've done here, I'd say. But officials began to grasp the unit's specific agenda of disruption only after the March 2018 poisoning of Mr. Skripal, the former GRU officer who had betrayed Russia by spying for the British. Mr. Skripal and his daughter, Yulia, fell grievously ill after exposure to a highly toxic nerve agent, but survived. 3 other people were sickened, including a police officer and a man who found a small bottle that British officials believe was used to carry the nerve agent and gave it to his girlfriend. The girlfriend, Dawn Sturgis, died after spraying the nerve agent on her skin, mistaking the bottle for perfume. Holy mackerel, I had no idea. I think I either didn't know that or forgot it. What a disaster. And by the way, a guy finds a bottle. Hey, this could be perfume. Girlfriend, have this. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. That doesn't seem like a good idea any time, anywhere. But, what are the chances it's going to be a deadly Russian nerve agent? Still, even if it isn't, even if it is perfume, I found this? That's not a gift. Never mind. Okay, well, as I was becoming an episode of Friends here, this is about Russian murders. Whew. Back on topic. The poisoning led to a geopolitical standoff with more than 20 nations, including the United States, expelling 150 Russian diplomats in a show of solidarity with Britain. Ultimately, the British authorities exposed 2 suspects who had traveled under aliases but were later identified by the investigative site Bellingcat. Hey, how about that? They did that? As Colonel Chapiga and Alexander Mishkin. 6 months after the poisoning, British prosecutors charged both men with transporting the nerve agent to Mr. Skripal's home in Salisbury, England, and smearing it on his front door. But the operation was more complex than officials revealed at the time. Yeah, plus the perfume thing. Exactly a year before the poisoning, 3 Unit 29155 operatives traveled to Britain, possibly for a practice run, 2 European officials said. One was Mr. Mishkin. A second man used the alias Sergei Pavlov. Intelligence officials believe the third operative, who used the alias Sergei Fedotov, oversaw the mission. Soon, officials established that 2 of these officers, the men using the names Fedotov and Pavlov, had been part of a team that attempted to poison the Bulgarian arms dealer Emilian Gebrev, I'm not certain how it says that, in 2015. The other operatives, also known only by their aliases, according to European intelligence officials, were Ivan Lebedev, Nikolai Kononikin. How about that? Kononikin, Alexei Nikitin, and Daniil Stepanov. The team would twice try to kill Mr. Gebrev, once in Sofia, the capital, and a month later, again at his home on the Black Sea. Oh, they love to operate around there. Speaking to reporters in February at the Munich Security Conference, Alex Younger, the chief of MI6, Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service, previously mentioned in the story about Boris Johnson, right, spoke out against the growing Russian threat. I would too. And hinted at coordination without mentioning a specific unit. Because secret, right? Sources and methods for us. You can see there is a concerted program of activity. And yes, it does often involve the same people, Mr. Younger said, pointing specifically to the Skripal poisoning and the Montenegro coup attempt. He added, "We assess there is a standing threat from the GRU and other Russian intelligence services, and that very little is off limits. The Kremlin sees Russia as being at war with a Western liberal order that it views as an existential threat. Gee whiz. At a ceremony in November for the GRU's centenary, Mr. Putin stood beneath a glowing backdrop of the agency's logo, a red carnation and an exploding grenade. That is some logo. And described it as legendary. I guess I'd say so too. I don't know what the legend is. I've never seen this thing, but it sounds legendary. Epic, as the kids would say. A former intelligence officer himself, Mr. Putin drew a direct line between the Red Army's spies who helped defeat the Nazis in World War II and the officers of the GRU who are helping the Nazis win this time. They didn't feel that was necessary to put in there, but I felt like it was a necessary addition. But he said, Putin drew a direct line between the Red Army spies who helped defeat the Nazis in World War II and officers of the GRU whose unique capabilities are now deployed against a different kind of enemy, anti-fascists. Unfortunately, the potential for conflict is on the rise in the world, Mr. Putin said during the ceremony, largely due to you, I think. Provocations and outright lies are being used and attempts are being made to disrupt strategic parity. In 2006, Mr. Putin signed a law legalizing targeted killings abroad. The same year, a team of Russian assassins used a radioactive isotope to murder Alexander Litvinenko, another former Russian spy in London. But hey, it's all legal in Russia. But they were doing this in London. Unit 29155 is not the only group authorized to carry out such operations, officials said. The British authorities have attributed Mr. Litvinenko's killing to the Federal Security Service, the intelligence agency once headed by Mr. Putin that often competes with the GRU. Well, at least they're opening their system to competition. That's a step forward for the Russians. Whew. Although little is known about Unit 29155 itself, there are clues in public Russian records that suggest links to the Kremlin's broader hybrid strategy. A 2012 directive from the Russian Defense Ministry assigned bonuses to 3 units for special achievements in military service. One was Unit 29155. Another was Unit 74455, which was involved in the 2016 election interference. The third was Unit 99450, whose officers are believed to have been involved in the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. All the greatest hits. A retired GRU officer with knowledge of Unit 29155 said that it specialized in preparing for diversionary missions, in groups or individually, bombing, murders, anything. Wow, those don't sound like diversions per se. They were very serious guys who served there, the retired officer said. They were officers who worked undercover and as international agents. Photographs of the unit's dilapidated former headquarters, which has since been abandoned, show myriad gun racks with labels for an assortment of weapons, including Belgian FN-30 sniper rifles, German, and get to sound like really cool and tactical, all these numbers and letters, German G3A3s, Austrian Steyr AUGs, AUGs, and I don't even know what that is, and American M16s. Woo-wee. You can do better than that. There was also a form outlining a training regimen, including exercises for hand-to-hand combat. The retired GRU officer confirmed the authenticity of the photographs, which were published by a Russian blogger. The current commander, General Averyanov, graduated in 1988 from the Tashkent Military Academy in what was then the Soviet Republic of Uzbekistan. It is likely that he would have fought in both the First and Second Chechen Wars, and he was awarded a Hero of Russia medal, the country's highest honor, in January of 2015. The 2 officers charged with the Skripal poisoning also received the same award. Get a lot of awards for that stuff, huh? Though an elite force, the unit appears to operate on a shoestring budget. According to Russian records, General Averyanov lives in a rundown Soviet-era building a few blocks from the unit's headquarters and drives a 1996 Vaz 21053. I mean, everything has to have 5 numbers, apparently. What is it? It is a rattletrap Russia-made sedan, or that's how it's described anyway. Operatives often share cheap accommodations to economize while on the road. British investigators say the suspects in the Skripal poisoning stayed in a low-cost hotel in, it says, it's Bow. Do they pronounce that Bow or Bow? I don't know. A downtrodden neighborhood in East London. One of you Londoners can tell me which one that one is supposed to be. But European security officials are also perplexed by the apparent sloppiness in the unit's operations. Mr. Skripal survived the assassination attempt, as did Mr. Jebrev, the Bulgarian arms dealer. The attempted coup in Montenegro drew an enormous amount of attention, but ultimately failed. A year later, Montenegro joined NATO. It is possible, security officials say, that they have yet to discover other more successful operations. It is difficult to know if the messiness has bothered the Kremlin. Perhaps, intelligence experts say, it's part of the point. I don't know about that. That kind of intelligence operation has become part of the psychological warfare, said, I guess we'll approximate the name here, Eric Niles Cross, or Eric Niles, I got no idea how you pronounce it, Eric Niles Cross. Last name is Kross, but the first name, get this, EERIK-NIILES. We're going to say Eric Niles Cross, a former intelligence chief in Estonia. It's not that they have become that much more aggressive. They want to be felt. It's part of the game. So I guess they're supposedly crazy like a fox, blowing all of these high-profile missions just to show how brazen they really are. I don't know if I necessarily buy into that, but, it certainly explains a lot and makes it that much more uncomfortable to acknowledge the fact that Donald Trump seems to be interested in doing everything he can to further Putin's agenda when it comes to American foreign policy. Well, you know what we say, political union with Russia to own the globalists. To that point, there is some new news I picked up the story here from Business Insider, though I saw it tweeted about last night and discussed, I guess, by maybe it was Elliot Engel who put out a press release about it. I've got this write-up for you from Business Insider. Sarah Gray put together. Get this one. This is just the latest in a series of things. The U.S. pulling out of both Syria and Open Skies Treaty would be the best birthday present for Vladimir Putin. Hey, I didn't even know it was his birthday, but it turns out to be true. Russian President Vladimir Putin's birthday was on Monday, October 7th. And he was potentially and inadvertently, well, I don't know about how inadvertent it was, gifted 2 foreign policy wins from the United States. Isn't that nice? The Trump administration made 2 recent foreign policy decisions that lawmakers from both sides of the aisle worry will benefit Russia. I wonder why that happened. President Donald Trump announced the decision to pull roughly 1,000 U.S. troops from northern Syria on Sunday night, a move that would not only endanger the Kurds, U.S. allies in the region in the fight against the Islamic State, but would also mark a victory for a group of adversarial countries, including Russia. A precipitous withdrawal of U.S. forces from Syria would only benefit Russia, Iran, and the Assad regime, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, believe it or not, a Republican from Kentucky, said, and it would increase the risk that ISIS and other terrorist groups regroup. It was also revealed via a letter from Chairman Elliot Engel, there it is, of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs that the Trump administration may pull the United States out of the Open Skies Treaty, an agreement that now has 34 participating countries, including Russia. Engel, a Democrat in particular, notes the treaty is important as a check against further Russian aggression against Ukraine. Why would that be important, right? In addition to being beneficial to Turkey, Iran, and the Islamic State, a U.S. withdrawal of troops from northern Syria would benefit Russia, which has strategically supported Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, particularly with air support. Russia's involvement in the conflict in Syria has mainly been self-serving, experts told the BBC, as a way to assert itself on the world stage and battle-test its military and new weapons. Andrew Paraliti, is that right? P-A-R-A, I-L-I-T-I, Paraliti, I'm going to guess. That's my best guess at that one. RAND director of the Center for Global Risk and Security spoke to Business Insider in 2018 to explain Russia's interest in the conflict, and he broke it down into three main reasons. First, assisting an ally. Second, joining the fight against terrorism. And 3, challenging the global role of the U.S. Additionally, Russia maintains a naval base in Tartus, Syria, its only base outside the former Soviet Union. The U.S. leaving would give Russia more control in the region and also give Russia global leverage with nations invested in ending the conflict in Syria. If you wanted to negotiate some end to the conflict, you couldn't disregard Russia's views on how that conflict should be settled. Margot Light, Professor Emeritus in International Relations at the London School of Economics, told the BBC in 2017. It's part of this determination, by Putin mostly, to show that Russia is a strong power that has to be reckoned with, she continued. On Monday, Engel wrote a letter to, Representative Engel, of course, wrote a letter to Robert O'Brien, Trump's national security advisor, saying he was deeply concerned, can you imagine, with reports that the Trump administration was thinking of pulling out of the Open Skies Treaty. As Business Insider's David Choi wrote, countries that are part of the treaty must notify other nations 72 hours in advance of a mission to conduct an observational flight to which the host country has 1 day to respond. Russia and the U.S. have been at odds over the treaty, with both countries claiming the other is restricting flights. Senator Tom Cotton has even called to pull out of the treaty altogether, citing Russia's restrictions over Kaliningrad, an increasingly militarized area in the Baltics. Engel notes this tension in his letter, but argues that these implementation concerns did not rise to the level of material breach of the treaty. While the U.S. may have sophisticated satellites to monitor Russia, the major concern is over what withdrawing from the treaty would mean for U.S. allies in Europe, particularly Ukraine, a country fighting Russian-backed separatists in their east. Ukraine relies on the treaty to monitor Russia's military. Daryl Kimball, the executive director of the Arms Control Association, told Choi that he didn't see any value in pulling out of the treaty. It doesn't gain any capability that we were being denied. It doesn't deny the Russians information that they can't otherwise obtain through their own satellites, he said. This is a confidence-building treaty that is particularly valuable to our European allies, and particularly in a time of increasing U.S.-Russian tensions. If the U.S. pulled out, it could further complicate dialogue with Russia and could undermine our European allies like Ukraine in their quest to keep Russia at bay. So, of course, what's the best solution? Yeah, absolutely. Leave Syria immediately and pull out of the Open Skies Treaty. Happy birthday, Vlad. Speaking of the U.S. withdrawal from Syria, here's a curious thing that I have not yet seen followed up in a published piece, so I'm not sure what to make of it. But if true, you would have to file this under yet another instance of always check the paperwork and make sure that Trump is actually doing these things before you print that he's doing them. And good lesson, again, for the traditional media. Just go with, if you have a story about something like this, just go with Trump purports to XYZ or purportedly does this thing. You won't be wrong. You'll never be wrong. He did purportedly order this to happen or purports to have done this or that. And if it turns out that it was all BS to begin with, then you look smart 3 days down the road when everyone else finds out and you had been out there with the headline of purports or purported to. And you look like you're looking ahead to the inevitable discovery that it was all crap to begin with. Anyway, Richard Engel tweeted this. He's an NBC News, the chief foreign correspondent for NBC News. This was tweeted out 8:15 yesterday morning. So this was kind of some interest. U.S. official tells NBC News no U.S. troops have left Syria. They are not packing, no orders to pack. So Trump's apparent green light to Turkey for a military operation against the Kurds has triggered confusion and panic, but not real change for now. Now, whether or not they're going to get around to it, or it was all crap, or they should have run with the headline that Trump purports to remove troops from Syria or purports to have ordered troops to leave Syria, everyone would be okay with that one. And even if it turned out to be true that the troops were leaving Syria, you'd still be accurate. I just think it's a wise precaution. No one will ever listen to me about it, but I do think it's a wise precaution. I don't understand why you wouldn't go with an option when you can never be wrong with it, and you can warn people that he frequently is full of crap. Why you would avoid that, I have no idea. Anyway, we'll see what happens, I guess. War and peace, life and death, troops in or out of a country. We'll see what happens. I hope it works out. It should all work out. I hope it works out. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. No packing going on, no orders to pack. That seems like it would have to happen, right? Why wasn't Santiago packing anything, right? You got to ask that question. The code red was ordered, Santiago's leaving for the rest of his life. And he didn't call anyone and hadn't packed a thing. I think that's the line, right? Why isn't anybody packing anything? I have no idea. Well, that's all there is to that one. I searched all over and I found no follow-up to it, but it was certainly widely shared yesterday. Be curious to see whether by Thursday that has straightened itself out. Okay, still lots to do. Hard to know which direction to go next. But I think maybe we'll save some things for discussion tomorrow. Maybe this is the place to wind things up. Inside the White House's efforts to contain Ukraine call fallout. This would be the latest of the articles, I guess, diving into the what the reporters love to call the tick-tock, and I hate that term, of what was going on inside the White House. Let's grab this one. CNN, as I mentioned, Pamela Brown, Jeremy Diamond, Caitlin Collins, Kevin Liptak joining on the byline for this one. By the time President Donald Trump's line with Vladimir Zelensky went quiet, the scramble began. So dramatic, right? In the hours and days after the Ukrainian president signed off, thank you, Mr. President, bye-bye. How do you like that? Bye-bye. That's cute. Nervous word spread among national security aides about the contents of the July 25th call, an early show of worry that Trump's request for an investigation into Joe Biden was far from the perfect conversation he now insists transpired. The scramble and fallout from the call, described by 6 people familiar with it, 6, wow, parallels and expands upon details described in the whistleblower complaint. The anxiety and internal concern reflect a phone conversation that deeply troubled national security professionals, even as Trump now insists there was nothing wrong with how he conducted himself. And it shows an ultimately unsuccessful effort to contain the tumult by the administration's lawyers. At least one National Security Council official alerted the White House's national security lawyers about the concerns, 3 sources familiar with the matter said, a detail that had not been previously disclosed. Those same lawyers would later order the transcript of the call moved to a highly classified server, typically reserved for code word classified material. So it was the lawyers, eh? Those concerns were raised independently of the complaint brought forward by an intelligence community whistleblower. They reflect new evidence of the unease mounting within the administration at the president's actions. Unsettled aides also immediately began quizzing each other about whether they should alert senior officials who were not on the call, mainly those at the Justice Department, since Trump had invoked the agency's boss, Attorney General Bill Barr, multiple times during the 30-minute talk. White House lawyers, aware of the tumult, wow, two uses of tumult, initially believed it could be contained within the walls of the White House. As more people became aware of the conversation and began raising their internal concerns about it, a rough transcript of the call was stored away in a highly classified server that few could access. The order to move the transcript came from the White House's national security lawyers to prevent more people from seeing it, according to people familiar with the situation. It also came after recognition the document would need to be preserved for legal reasons. An entirely different concern. As the level of worry mounted, however, it would become clear the issue could not be contained to the executive branch. Two whistleblowers have come forward to allege Trump improperly used his position to pressure Ukraine into investigating Biden. That's led Democrats to open an impeachment inquiry into Trump and spurred allegations he abused his power for political gain. The concerns and complaints that White House lawyers once believed would be contained to the executive branch have put the presidency in crisis. Before all that, the call, which began just past 9 a.m. Eastern Time, wasn't viewed by many of Trump's foreign policy aides as a highly sensitive conversation, unlike some of his other phone calls with international counterparts. Instead, it was viewed as a customary conversation and the result of a long-time effort by aides such as then National Security Advisor John Bolton and Energy Secretary Rick Perry to convince Trump to engage the new Ukrainian leader as a counterweight to Russia. Still, one former White House official said there was a unique sense of anticipation surrounding the conversation, stemming partly from Trump's apparent interest in it, something he'd shown few times ahead of previous calls with foreign leaders. It was weird, the former official said. He seemed to be taking interest in this particular country. It's weird that he would have an interest in a country. Well, for Trump it is. Though multiple officials have insisted they were largely out of the loop on concerns over the call, most who work closely with the president were aware of his obsession with Hunter Biden's business dealings in the country. He had been mentioning it more often privately, though several said they didn't realize how much it would escalate or that Trump would raise it directly with his Ukrainian counterpart. Like most of his phone calls that occur before noon, Trump conducted the conversations from the third-floor White House residence, where he spends most mornings watching television, telly, and consulting advisors by phone. Lazy loafer, pretty much what everyone knew to be the case. Just glad they threw that one in there. Sitting in his private quarters, Trump wasn't surrounded by the usual clutch of aides who would accompany him in person during a call with a foreign leader made from the Oval Office. Instead, a number of aides were listening in the Situation Room or on their own lines. Those who listened included Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, we now know, who insisted to reporters last week that Trump's conversation was consistent with U.S. policy toward Ukraine. Of course, he also insisted last week that he didn't know anything about the call, but okay. Tom Morrison, the National Security Council's senior director for Europe and Russia, was on the line. So was Rob Blair, a national security aide to acting chief of staff Mick Mulvaney, and Keith Kellogg, the national security advisor to Vice President Mike Pence. So, did Pence know about the call? Yeah, Keith Kellogg was on it. Officials said standard operating procedures suggests Alexander Vindman, the National Security Council's Ukraine expert, would also have been listening in, but we don't know whether that's actually the case or not. It's just usually the case, and you know what they do with things that are usually the case. They throw them right out. Bolton was not on the line. By late July, the relationship between Trump and Bolton was deeply strained, but typically a national security advisor accompanies the president on phone calls with foreign leaders. That was probably scrapped as well. Elsewhere, a State Department interpreter fluent in Ukrainian was providing real-time translation, but I thought others were reporting that the conversation actually took place in English because Zelensky's English is very good. But okay. And a duty officer from the Situation Room took notes that would later be paired with a log of the call using voice recognition software to put together a rough transcript. Almost as soon as Trump had hung up, word of what he said on the call began to circulate among National Security Council staffers. In particular, his request that Zelensky investigate Biden. The entreaty caused concern among some of his national security officials who discussed among themselves whether Trump had crossed a line. Eventually, the internal consternation escalated. Within roughly a week, the top lawyer at an intelligence agency had contacted John Eisenberg, the top lawyer on the National Security Council, to discuss concerns raised by an intelligence officer through a colleague about a phone call Trump had held with a foreign leader, though didn't specify the country in question. Eisenberg said he had a vague understanding of the concerns surrounding the Zelensky call and would do some more digging on it, according to a person familiar with the matter. Around the same time, a transcript of the call was being finalized by staffers at the National Security Council. Initially, the process of transcribing and archiving the call followed the standard procedure for dozens of previous presidential calls with foreign leaders. The raw transcript of the call was circulated to a small group of officials, including the National Security Advisor, Deputy National Security Advisor, members of the National Security Council's Executive Secretariat, and NSC lawyers. From there, the National Security Council director responsible for Ukraine, Vindman, reviewed the document for accuracy before the document made its way to Bolton and his deputy, Charlie Kupperman. At that point, the document would ordinarily have been marked limited access and shared on a need-to-know basis. But within a few days, a National Security Council lawyer, acting on orders from Eisenberg, his boss, directed council officials to move the transcript to the code word classified system. A former White House official said even though there was no code word classified material discussed during the call. One person familiar with the matter said it was possible Eisenberg ordered the call transcript placed into the code-worded system after his initial call with the CIA's top lawyer to preserve the record, since he realized it could become a matter of a legal issue. But others familiar with the matter said the move came after officials became aware of the internal concerns and wanted to prevent additional people from reading the document. White House lawyers initially believed the contents of the complaint would remain within the executive branch and not reach Congress or the public. Several sources said the White House counsel's office kept a very close hold on the initial general counsel disclosure and the ultimate whistleblower complaint until just a few days before the complaint's public release, when it became clear it would reach lawmakers. Those kept in the dark about those items until the days before their release included Mulvaney and the president's communications aides. And there is little sign, at least in the call's immediate aftermath, that the president himself was aware of the scramble ensuing among his underlings to contain the fallout of his conversation. An hour and a half after the call ended, Trump departed the White House alongside his son Eric for an event at the Pentagon, leaving the chaos behind. And isn't that pretty much what you expect from Donald Trump at this point? Just blabbering on the telephone and then leaving the chaos behind for someone else to clean up. All right. Well, speaking of things for someone else to clean up, it is the end of our Wednesday pre-taped show. We don't know what has happened in the morning and what chaos has broken loose overnight, but just as Putnam does, and as he usually does, he bats cleanup for us very well afterwards, since we tend to get micro-focused on things, and he takes an entire tour around the world in half the time. What an efficient podcast. Stay tuned for that next.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoyed the pre-taped presentation we have for you today. We'll be back on the air live tomorrow and again on Friday. I don't think anything stands in the way of that, although, anything can happen. I'll update you on that if it happens, when it happens, later on. Stay tuned.